Welcome everybody to the launch event for the Architectural League's American Roundtable project. I'm Rosalie Ginevra, the League's Executive Director, and I'm very happy to be here tonight with the editors of all 9 of the Roundtable reports and Nick Anderson, who's the American Roundtable Project Director. Nick is going to tell you a bit more about the structure of the project, and we'll hear from all of the editors about their approach to telling important aspects of the stories of their communities. I'd like to start us off by saying a few thank yous and making some general remarks about our intentions and hopes for the project. First, thank you most of all to the editors and contributors to the reports. They have all devoted a huge amount of thought and time to this project. I want to thank Nick, who's kept everything moving forward and coordinated a very large number of ideas and people and moving parts, and with great intelligence and skill. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Jameson Proctor and his team at Athletics, who several years ago designed the League's website, archleague.org, and in an intense effort over the last 6 weeks, have created a new part of that site to accommodate and spotlight the texts, images, videos, and audio features that make up the American Roundtable reports. They provided the structure, and Sarah Wessler, the League's digital editor, led the effort along with Ann Carlisle and Nanase Shirakawa of the League staff to get the reports into this new format and available online, an effort that will continue over the next couple of months. Heartfelt thanks to all of them. I also thank the National Endowment for the Arts and the Graham Foundation, along with the J. Clausen Mills Fund of the Architectural League, for financial support for the project. The very idea of a roundtable and genuine conversation, given our current national climate and especially the events of the last week, seems aspirational. We are happy to acknowledge and embrace that aspiration without lapsing into comforting platitudes about unity or lack of difference. What we are seeking with this project is to hold 2 ideas in mind simultaneously: that there is a great deal of true variation and distinctiveness and contrast in this country, in landscapes and characteristic built forms, in culture and habits and tastes, as well as in economic prosperity and ease of daily life. And there are also a great many shared concerns that cut across geographies, including issues around water quality and scarcity, for example, and access to food, issues of environmental justice and the responsibility and negligence of industry for waste and ravaged landscapes, shared interests about the deeply unjust impact of location on access to healthcare, and about the serious repercussions of lack of investment in infrastructure. And there's also a shared and remarkably strong and enduring attachment to specific places, whether they're in the ascendant or on hard times. What we hope to achieve through American Roundtable is to help us all move away from the kind of casual assumptions and misunderstandings that we fall into all too easily. The country is not homogenized, despite the ubiquity of drive-it and chain restaurants and chain hotels and chain stores. The omnipresence of media has not flattened reality. We are the better for our differences, but we must also see them honestly and work against the inequity and injustice that all too often unfairly accompanies difference. What these 9 editorial teams have produced is really powerful. The reports have brought me to tears, have made me very angry, have made me want to jump in a car or a plane to go see for myself, have made me recognize how many people in how many places are working to improve the circumstances of daily life and the life chances that a particular place can offer. I hope that as the reports are published over the next several months, you will spend a lot of time with them and come away as moved as I have been. And with that, I'm going to turn over the program to Nick.
Thank you, Rosalie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Anderson, and I've had the privilege of serving as the project director for American Roundtable. Tonight, we gather to celebrate the launch of this new initiative, and we are so very excited to begin to be able to share this project that has indeed been years in the making, and to begin conversation and discussion to better understand and improve communities and landscapes across the United States. This project emerged from the collective shock of the 2016 election and developed over the following 4 years as it became increasingly clear that the country looks very different depending on where one stands, with some places thriving and others struggling, either supported or battered by divergent economic, social, and cultural forces, the very things that Rosalie just alluded to. And specifically, it felt to us that the ways in which the built environment reflects and contributes to these forces, how it affects lives, communities, our natural world, needed to be brought into our national discourse. This felt particularly true for less populated communities, the rural areas, small towns, and cities of our country. The proposition at the heart of American Roundtable is that too often our understanding of these rural areas or small cities is reduced to caricature and oversimplification. And our hope for American Roundtable is to highlight, in all their complexity and nuance, communities often overlooked, and to provide platforms for individuals and organizations to share their stories and work, imagining, understanding, and improving their local built environments. If the goal of American Roundtable is rather simple, how it might be achieved is not. No single portrait of a place could ever be wholly accurate. How does one describe or interpret a place? Whose stories are told? Which forces are highlighted? Where does one begin when enumerating the manifold needs, hopes, and desires of any community? American Roundtable very much keeps this in mind. It claims neither to be definitive nor comprehensive, but we hope that the work included in this initiative will serve as an introduction and as provocation for additional thinking. The core of American Roundtable is a set of 9 reports, each on a different community or region. These 9 reports were selected through a process that began in November of 2019, when the Architectural League released a national call inviting teams to submit proposals exploring a community and its built environment through 5 topic areas: public space, health, work and economy, infrastructure, and environment. At least one person on the editorial team needed to be either a designer or design historian. We encouraged people to think creatively about how stories and report features might be told through different media. And we further looked highly upon proposals that really emphasized local voices and had true connections to communities. We received nearly 125 proposals from 40 states and territories, and a selection committee of David Dowell, Anne-Marie Duval-Decker, Rosalie Ginevro, Mario Gooden, Paul Lewis, Jonathan Massey, Sue Mobley, Aaron Moore, Lynn Rice, Jason Schupak, and myself selected 9 to be developed. Those are Africatown, Alabama, along the Lumbee River, North Carolina, Appalachia, West Virginia, Brownsville, Texas, the Cheyenne River Reservation of South Dakota, the Lower Rio Grande region of New Mexico, River Valley, Maine, South Beach, Washington, and Youngstown, Warren, Lordstown, Ohio. Yesterday, we published the first report, brilliantly edited by Nina Chase, on Appalachian communities across West Virginia, along with the project's website and introductory material. In the coming months, the 8 additional reports will be published bi-weekly in pairs. And later this spring, the reports will also be published in a series of print booklets. Tonight also marks the first in a series of discussions and presentations complementing the reports. Beginning January 27th, we will be holding lunchtime presentations by each American Roundtable report team. I hope you will join us through the winter to learn more about each community and to engage in discussion with report editors and contributors on the topics and issues that emerge from their explorations. We will also be convening additional evening conversations that include representatives from all 9 reports to discuss themes that emerge from across the project. Many of those themes Rosalie mentioned. You can find on the American Roundtable website a full schedule of the report publication dates and upcoming programs. American Roundtable, as its name suggests, is a place for discussion, of sharing ideas openly, messily, and debating in good faith forward. In this time when our politics and national conversations are riven by division and distrust, anger and fear, and we look upon the state of our country with some sadness, we offer this project optimistically, with demands to right historical and ongoing injustice, with gratitude for the hard and mostly unsung work of community leaders and common citizens, with excitement for the designs and plans that seek to improve our environments, and with true passion for a better future. Lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to extend a heartfelt thanks to all of the editors of the American Roundtable reports. Not only did they produce amazing compendia of material, but they worked with fortitude and grace through this very difficult year. Something we have worked hard to do is to privilege the voices, experiences, and lived realities of the residents of these places, to be of a place, not about it. This could not have been done without the work and knowledge and connections of the report editors. Editors, we thank you. So to begin our American Roundtable, we wanted to invite the editors of all 9 reports together for a conversation on methods, the ways in which they approach their work, understanding place. For those of you in the audience, please ask questions using the Q&A feature, not the chat feature on Zoom. And following the discussion, we do hope to field some questions from the audience to conclude tonight's program. The editors to turn their cameras on. And as folks are doing so, what we are going to do is, rather than going through formal introductions one by one of each person, I'd like to invite each team to very briefly say who they are, where they are from, and identify their community. To start us off, might we go to the West Coast and to Rob and Dan?
Hi, my name is Robert Hutchison. I'm an architect with my own firm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm an affiliate associate professor at the University of Washington Department of Architecture, and I am one of the 2 editors for the South Beach portrait.
Yes, hello, and I'm Dan Abramson, co-editing with Rob our Dynamics Landscape Report on South Beach. I'm an associate professor of urban design and planning at the University of Washington in Seattle.
Great. And Annie and Zoe.
I'm Annie Coombs. I'm a New York City-based architect. I am co-editor of a report on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, which also includes some relevant contributions from the Pine Ridge Reservation, also in South Dakota.
Hi, I'm Zoe Maliaros, and Annie and I worked on the project on the reservations. I'm an architect in New York as well.
Might you also just say your connection to Cheyenne River as well?
Yes, so I mean, we have known Cheyenne River for a long time. We went out there as teenagers when we were 16 as part of a group summer through our summer camp. And so we've been traveling back for a very long time, and have also engaged in a couple different ways with some of the youth organizations on the reservation as well, which we can go into in more detail later.
Great, thanks. Ani, might you go down to New Mexico?
Hi, I'm Anne González Lara. I'm an architect and the co-founder of Idle Projects, and I'm also a full-time faculty member at Pratt Institute's School of Architecture. My report is based or is focusing on the lower Rio Grande region of New Mexico, and it's looking at its arid landscapes and diverse people as they relate to the built environment. My connection to the place, I lived in New Mexico for many years, and I still go back and forth. I live between Santa Fe and Brooklyn, New York.
Great. And moving down the Rio Grande, might we go to Brownsville next?
Sure. My name's Lizzie McWillie. I'm the Director of Urbanism at Building Community Workshop, and I'm in Dallas. We have an office in Brownsville, and we worked there for a long time. One of the co-editors. Next person.
Hi, I'm Josue Ramirez, pronouns he, him, his, here in Estocna territory in McAllen, Texas. I'm part of the team with Jesse and with Lizzie and Kelsey putting together this Brownsville Undercurrents. And my connection is that I migrated here as a child and I live here. Currently, I am a part of the Community Development Corporation of Brownsville, now known as Come Dream, Come Build, and I do their Mi Casita rural program, self-help program here.
I'm Kelsey Menzel. I'm the development manager at BC Workshop. I live in Dallas. I was introduced to, or first got to know Brownsville doing research for my thesis, and it's a very special place. I love visiting.
Hi, I'm Jesse Miller. I'm an architect. I live in Brownsville, and I used to work at BC Workshop with Lizzie, and also with Josue. We used to work on projects together back when we used to do that. But it's great to be a part of this.
Yes. Renee. Oh, your mic is off.
Then. Okay, hi, I'm Renee Kemp-Rotan and I'm reporting in from Birmingham, Alabama. Our case study was on Africatown, Alabama. I'm originally from DC, moved down south to work the Olympics, moved to the left to find myself in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was introduced to Africatown after being in Birmingham for 15 years. I'd never heard of the place. But one of my editors was from Mobile, Alabama, and kept telling me to come down. And 3 years ago, I discovered Africatown, Alabama, a 19th century settlement that was created by emancipated slaves in the 19th century. And it still exists, and the descendants still live there.
Great. And moving up to the Ohio team.
Hello, everyone. My name is Killian Riano. I am the Associate Director at the CUDC, and I was the Chief Editor of our report, but also worked alongside Terry Schwartz, Kristen Seaberg, Katie Slusher, and Caitlin Boniecki on our report, as well as all our contributors. I'm working in the Mahoning Valley. The Mahoning Valley is one of the places where steel and iron it really was part of the identity and the labor movements that became a part of it. And that has suffered with the industrialization. So we took a view of all the elements of our report through the lens of what a future of work might mean in this area. And my connection is that I'm in Shaker Heights, Ohio right now. I work at the Cleveland River Design Collaborative, and I have been working in the Mahoning Valley for the last 5 years, working with leaders, stakeholders, and teaching studios.
Great, fantastic. And then to Nina.
Hey everybody, my name is Nina Chase. I'm a landscape architect and founding principal of Merritt Chase. We're a landscape architecture practice in Pittsburgh. I was the editor of our multimedia report on Appalachia, specifically focused on the state of West Virginia, with an incredible team of collaborators and folks who helped put that together. And our report really focused on offering visions for alternative futures for landscapes in the state of West Virginia. And my connection to West Virginia is I was born and raised in Morgantown, West Virginia, educated also almost entirely in West Virginia. I'm a West Virginia University grad from the Landscape Architecture Department, and I live in Pittsburgh, which I've said before is the Paris of Appalachia. So if you're unfamiliar, it's very much part of Appalachia, and welcome you to join us here anytime.
And the North Carolina team.
My name is Joey, pronouns are he, him. I am currently in New Haven, and Morgan and I, who will introduce herself next, both have a connection with Norton Sanford, who is the Director of Growing Change, introduce himself as well. For the past 4 years, we've been working together and collaborating on various projects.
Hi everyone, I'm Morgan Aguilard. I'm broadcasting, I guess, from Brooklyn, where I work as an educational real estate developer. And I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, though, and got connected to the North Carolina project through grad school when I was there with Joey and making trips during the summer to visit North Carolina.
So hello, I'm Norton Sanford, and we are in rural North Carolina. We are right on the border of North and South Carolina. And we are reclaiming closed prisons. We have a closed decommissioned unit in North Carolina to try to help to rethink and redeploy the assets of the nearly 300 closed prisons in the US currently. We represent the Lumbee River region that exists across several counties and is a place of great diversity. I think Rosalie earlier, we would fall into the hardship category of communities. So, and we're greatly appreciative of our work with the MIT team and the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. And lastly, but not least, moving up to Maine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Kerr, and I'm an assistant professor of architecture history at the University of New Mexico. And I worked on co-editing the report about the River Valley in Maine, which is a cluster of paper mill towns where I grew up.
And I'm Carrie Arsenal, and I worked with Aaron, and I also grew up in this paper mill town, although I was a little older than Aaron, and I am a book critic, a book editor at Orion magazine, and an editor at Literary Hub, and I wrote a book about this town, unsurprisingly called Milltown, just this year, so.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. And as you can see, just from the number of editors involved, this entire project is a massive collective effort. And each editor also represents 5 to 10 contributors, and then countless interviewees and others who have helped on this project. So a big shout out to everyone who has made all of this possible. And we really look forward to expanding the conversation in the weeks and months to come. So we do hope tonight will be a conversation as much as this technology allows. And to start things off, we asked each team to consider a seemingly simple question, but one that we have found through this process to be really quite complex and difficult, and to prepare some thoughts in response. And that is, how does one go about understanding a place? To kick things off, I was wondering if I could turn to Joey and Morgan.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so I think this report has provided a really interesting opportunity for us with this report, kind of representing Group Project, the architecture and design collaborative that Morgan and I are part of, that has been working with Norton and his team down in North Carolina over the past few years. And since we've been working very closely with him, we have met many other members of the community, but the report provided a really nice platform to be able to kind of dive deeper into those relationships with some of these other folks who are doing really incredible work, kind of in parallel with each other for the most part, and to understand some of the overlaps that started to emerge from their work, whether they were farmers or folks who were working in universities to support students who were facing housing and food insecurity. We also were able to talk more with a professor who is a theologian and professor of philosophy. So kind of being able to dive deeper into these relationships, because I think for us that was and has continued to be a way of getting to know a place is actually by developing deeper relationships with the people that live in those places and have the experiences of that place, especially as both Morgan and I, not being from the area, that is our kind of way of accessing and understanding what life is and learning from their experiences. And just spending time and conversing with them was really kind of the essential key to that and listening.
Yeah, I'll just add that one thing that the kind of sub question that we were posed is what did we learn from doing the report? I think one thing that we learned was at the onset of having a report that has ended up having so many legs and ended up having so many contributors and people being a part of it, that really important to like expectation set and figure out what are we hearing from the community and what what are they actually looking for us to kind of produce in a way that's helpful for them? And so that like and to ensure that we're having a mutually beneficial relationship both ways, right? And to not assume that as like design professionals, the end product is, for example, 100% construction documents, when that may not be what is most needed and what is most necessary for moving a particular community project forward. And so that's been exciting to figure out where can we be most helpful and where can we kind of stretch our skills, our design skills beyond what's kind of canonized as traditional design skills to still be of use and still be able to connect with the community.
Great. And Norton, would you like to add anything to that thought in terms of how this project thought about place?
Yeah, just to give props to the MIT team in that it was kind of a perfect match for the project that you are advancing here, because their methodology was really about embedding in the local community. So like Aaron and Carrie, I'm sure others in this group as well. I'm from the place that we're talking. In fact, I am still in the place that we're talking about right now. And it was powerful that their team was able to come in and kind of embed with us and to hear the greater context and frankly to be adaptable on the ground in a place that's fairly hard hit. So so I think it really complements some of the methodology that you may be arguing for in this project.
So wondering if I could maybe now turn to Annie and Zoe to pick up on this question. And again, thinking about how you're not obviously from the Cheyenne River Reservation, but you have maintained a long relationship. And in your report, you really privilege the voices through a number of interviews and by presenting those sort of testimonies at the forefront.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think what Joey started off with really resonated with us as well, that this is, you know, we have a history, but again, that history, I think coming to this project was really a wonderful way of blending the personal and the professional, that, you know, to understand a project like this, it can't just be an academic project, what you're trying to figure out. It's not a question to answer or a problem to solve. It's really about building relationships and kind of coming back and being able to know that you've made those connections, that they're going to evolve and change, but that it's something that kind of grows over time for sure. And we know we're not from there, and we know that our relationships have changed over the years as well, and kind of to take each conversation for what it is and to really listen to what people have to say and what's going on. You know, we learn something new with every conversation, with every person we meet, we get something from it. I don't know if you have something to add, Annie.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the other thing that we're always learning more every time we speak to somebody, I mean, in any community, but on the reservation, because we're not from there, but we have friends there, you know, we meet people through a friend, and then somebody refers us to somebody else, and then you meet somebody in the grocery store. So when we have been out there, you know, everybody has a different perspective, and it's been very important to remember that, like, not to latch on to one person's perspective as like, oh, they've figured it out, or, you know, there's like one way to understand the place, because the reality is it's viewed from so many different ways. So that's been a really important thing. And as editors, we've really tried to step back and let there be voices that actually sometimes don't agree with each other, and to make sure that there is that kind of representation within the report. And then more than that too, like, our report is focused on the Cheyenne River Reservation, but there are 7 Lakota reservations in the state of South Dakota. They used to be one giant reservation, and all 7 today are in the top 10 poorest counties in the United States. And to, you know, to look at Cheyenne River alone wouldn't be telling the whole story, because people on Cheyenne River are related to people on Pine Ridge, who are related to people on Rosebud, and et cetera. And the place is a community in many ways. So the place of the reservation of Cheyenne River is it's not just in isolation. The place is the whole territory, because also the Lakota traditionally moved across the territory. And I think there is a fluid relationship between the reservations. And then on the flip side, each reservation has developed its own character. So it's just been very important to sort of try to tune into that as best as we can. That there's a lot of similarities and then there's a lot of differences across the reservations.
Yeah.
I'm gonna mute on that.
And I guess, in terms of other kind of some of the questions that were posed, we were really surprised actually methodologically at how well the Zoom conversations ended up working. I'm kind of curious to hear how other people took that. I mean, we had expected to spend a significant amount of time with this project over the summer and with trips back and forth to have some of those sort of types of impromptu conversations that would happen or connections that would be made. And it was daunting to sort of during COVID have to face, how are we going to do this? Are we going to be able to connect with people? Are we going to be able to reach people? It's much harder to call somebody you don't know and, versus have a friend say, stop by, or I'll bring you there, or we'll meet people, but we were really pleased and surprised at how intimate a lot of these conversations felt and how deep we were able to go. We learned so much, and we're just incredibly grateful for the time spent from all of the collaborators, some of whom we've known for years and many of whom we met for the first time, over the course of this project.
I think that's a really important point that you brought up in terms of the sort of multiplicity of voices and the many, many voices that make up a community, and of course, not always in unison and not always in harmony. And, I think that's something that we definitely have tried to do across this project, is to show that diversity of perspective. And to all the readers, I invite you to really kind of think about that and think about the various ways that all of these voices come together to form communities in different ways. I'm wondering if might bring Carrie and Aaron in, because I know you've both thought a lot about the sort of inside-outside perspective around communities and the ways that place is understood. As you both sort of mentioned in your introductions, you both grew up there, still have family and many connections there, but are now away. And in your introduction to the piece, you also really kind of think about this and ruminate on what this means and those relationships. So I wonder if you might be able to pick up on that and kind of continue with our conversation.
Yeah, I'll start. First of all, I was fortunate that I didn't have to do a lot on Zoom because I've been working on this book for 10 years. So it was critical when I was doing my research there was to meet people where they are, like at coffee shops and bars, and really not interrogate or interview them, but just go and have conversations. And most of the people I knew, or I knew their family. So it was really, as I said to Aaron this afternoon, it proved invaluable to having those in opening doors for me, but it was my job, I felt like, to walk through them respectfully, and not give voice to people, but like just listen, really. And that was a big part of how I felt learning about this community, was listening, because there were a lot of politics involved too in the last 2 voting cycles that were there. And instead of talking about politics, I just listened to see what was happening on the ground. At the same time, the outside perspective offers a different kind of calibration. I'm not privy to the daily grind of their lives, which I found out deep into my research. I tried to be involved and kind of got booted out of a project that I began there on the ground, an environmental project, water related. Anyway, Aaron, what would you like to say about that?
I echo those sentiments, and I found that it was really the people, and this is really the way that we introduce our report through the kind of work of Raymond Williams and his understanding of the insider as being an insider and an outsider, and we really found that it was the people and the work and the friendships that make the community a kind of place, the kind of place that we were raised. But after leaving and participating in other kind of global spaces of discourse, you start to see the community in a different light, and you start to see the beauty of the landscape in a different way. You also start to see the way in which it is kind of used rather than as a place, right? For survival, for enjoyment, but also for personal and kind of capitalist gain. So I think some ways to understand the place is to grapple with both of these perspectives, right? Both inside and outside. And through our report, we tried to kind of combine those inside and outside perspectives, you know, big picture theories and histories, as well as on the ground narratives and voices of those that still live there. Yeah.
I would also add too, inside and outside, part of that too is I saw myself as being a critic and an advocate at the same time, as well as a witness and a participant many times during all of this. And then you asked about, I just want to add one more thing. It's a little off topic, but you asked what we learned about this. And it actually became really clear to me and ended up in our project that the monuments, I was walking around town for 10 years, basically working on this. And it became really clear that the monuments and the memorials felt really tragically out of place, ironic or untrue. And that they didn't appreciate actually the people that were there, the ordinary people or the ordinary person, and they papered over the environmental destruction that was happening in this place. And I felt like they really felt monolithic instead of representative. So part of our project interrogated and sort of subverted those monuments. Anyway, it surprised me to, you know, growing up and with those things all around me, and then not really seeing it until I kept going back and forth to this town.
I was wondering, maybe now turning to Renee, that might be an interesting opening for you to share your thoughts on this kind of question of how we understand place, and how in Africatown, the community is attempting to, in many ways, reclaim its narrative and to chart a new future and to understand a new way that it can imagine its identity and place. So might you
Yeah, well, I kind of got dumped into Africatown. My right arm, Vicki Howell, kept inviting me to Africatown. I didn't believe it existed. And then I happened there one summer, and the first place she took me was the cemetery. So speaking of monuments and memorials, I really got my first taste of the history, and it's such a sacred place. Going to the Africatown Cemetery, which was started by emancipated slaves in 1868, 1872. And really, to start at a cemetery to learn about the history of a place is a very interesting way to go about doing business. It just so happens that the history of Africatown is surrounding 12 descendant families that got off of the Clotilda ship. And the ship is now a very, very big deal. I mean, Anderson Cooper just did a major report. The Smithsonian sent the Black scuba divers down, and the Slave Wrecks Project scuba divers down. National Geographic came down. So this place that had been practically anonymous, but very much protected by the descendants of this ship, all of a sudden was discovered by the world. And so there was a lot of territoriality about the telling of the story and who would tell the story, and the trusting or the non-trusting of the storytellers. Because Africatown is a place that had been so ignored. I mean, the blight there is fairly startling. And to come in as an outsider and see the blight, the first, I think, really adult moment is realizing that the stories behind the facades are more important than the facades that you see. So I made a commitment. I had been going down to Africatown once a month for 2 years and staying a week. And I got to know everyone down there. I mean, it took a long time to build the trust with the community, because I was down there before the ship was found. After the ship was found, everyone was suspect. You know, everybody thought that someone was coming in to basically pimp the ship and pimp the story. So we started this mantra that said, if you can save the ship, you can save the town. Because people in the tourism industry down there were very hyped on the ship, but this town that had not been taken care of or honored for 160 years was just kind of laid bare. So I used design as a leverage tool. I was asked to come down and figure out how design could play a role in all of these wants and the wish lists from all of these community development corporations. Many of them were not getting along. So I invented a design competition. I'm an urban designer. And initially, I really got my butt kicked on this one. Initially, I went down and I talked to everybody and I came back with this idea, let's do a competition for a history museum. And the community said, a history museum? We need more than just a history museum. So I ended up listening to what every community group said they wanted. And by the time I got finished with that listening exercise that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, the competition was no longer about a single site. The competition now, it's called the Africatown International Design Idea Competition. It covers 4 sites and 16 venues of monuments, memorials, and interpretive sites that are all linked to the Africatown story on both land and water. So it has really, grown geographically, and now it actually connects 3 towns. So it was really very much trial by fire. And I remember that the elders in the community, it's very much an African tradition. If you go into an African village, and I've been in a few, but if you go into an African village, you just don't walk up into the village. You really have to come to the border or the boundary or the gateway or the threshold, ask permission to enter, ask permission to tell your story, and then the elders all get together and give you an opportunity to say why you're there, and then they vote. So that's really what happened with the competition. I mean, the community of all of these groups got together. The eldest member called a community-wide meeting. 200 people showed up, and I was there with the PowerPoint, projector, really showing and sharing the community, first of all, that I had heard them. I heard about their wants and their needs. And then I started showing them various options and ways that design had been used to elevate those concerns in other places. And at the end of my PowerPoint, they literally took a vote. And I was shaking in my boots, but we got unanimous consent. Thank goodness. Africatown said yes to the competition as being using design, as a mediator. Trial by fire, I have to tell you. So that was really cool stuff.
I wonder maybe actually, Nina, if you might kind of jump in here, because I think in some ways, your report shares some of what Renee was saying in terms of the sort of narratives and the sort of ideas of kind of what defines a community and how understanding a place and understanding places that have in some ways been ignored for a long time can be kind of rethought and reimagined, and different ideas of the future can be coalesced around the idea of design and design initiatives.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think tie in directly to Renee, what you were talking about. One of our goals for our report was really contributing to an expanding narrative for West Virginia. There's a narrative that is changing, and it's changing from it's changing, I think, from the outsider's perspective. It's always been there in the state, but from maybe an outsider's perspective, it's been told in a certain way related to poverty. And there's kind of this stereotype of hillbillies in West Virginia that's just perpetuated at every national scale. And there's a narrative and multiple narratives that are challenging this, that are coming from within. And our goal was to help contribute to that from the designer's perspective. There are lots of authors and academics and ecologists and chefs and artists who are doing this right now in West Virginia. And design is there, but it, in my opinion, could be louder. And I think as a tool, so design as an action and as a set of tools, you know, running a design competition that can look very different in many different ways, and design as an action and as a process is something that we wanted to be able to showcase. And as landscape architects, we were really interested in how land can be valued maybe in a different way than it's been valued in the past in West Virginia and in the Ohio communities that Killian's working in and others in Appalachia. You know, land has a value for extraction purposes and historically has, but we know that obviously land has lots of, there's a multiplicity of value for land. And so how can we start to shape the narrative around land in different ways? And so we came at it from the angle of one, our report kind of gets divided into two sections. The first is doing a historic analysis of land in West Virginia and then proposing alternative futures and using design graphics and tools such as just a simple rendering to kind of paint a picture of what these alternative futures could look like. And those futures were informed directly by current and former West Virginians. Because of COVID, we weren't able to gather and have conversation, but we invited current and former West Virginians to write letters to future family members who might live in West Virginia, ask them what they would want the state to look like or how land to be used in the state. And so working with folks, some of whom we knew, some of whom we didn't, who provided these letters to the future family members, providing inspiration for what these alternative futures could look like. That's the first half of our report. And then the second half is actually documenting some of this exciting emerging work that's already happening across the state, where folks are already thinking about how to use land in different ways. And so we have our all of our features from our contributors each document one or a couple projects where we're exciting land-based presence. They're not futures, their presence are already happening. And so for us as a way to understand place, we came at it being from there, but having design education coming at it, asking how can designers help expand this narrative for the state and add value to a conversation that's happening right now.
Can I chip in for just a second on that? Because the interesting thing about Africatown is that descendants from the original ship called the Clotilda are still living there. And so really what happened, it's so interesting, the descendants of this ship kept telling the powers that be in Mobile, Alabama, about the history of the ship. But because the ship had been burned and discarded, just to deny the fact that it had been a slave ship, everyone was poo-pooing the story. And then the ship was found. So now who is going to have admiralty over the ship? Who's going to tell the story of the slave ship that the descendants have been talking about all along? And so what we have really done, it's really fascinating. We have tapped into archaeologists on this, and we're looking very strongly and heavily at this work co-authored by archaeologist Michael Blakey. He was the forensic archaeologist for the New York burial grounds, but he has produced something called the Rubric, Engaging Descendant Communities on the Interpretation of American Slavery. You can get it on the National Trust site, but it really grades the way you go about engaging the stories of descendants who should be a part of the storytelling and not just coming for the briefings about how the story is going to be told. Mm-hmm. So we learned a lot by being good listeners there.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point thing about sort of archaeology in a way, and actually maybe to Ani, are sort of social archaeologies of places and the ways that people have experienced the land and their identity and communities. I'm wondering if you might be able to say a few words about that and how you framed your report.
I think that you said, I lost you for a second. But yeah, so yeah, I can go. I think that I got the question. But Maybe before I get into that, I think that when you asked about how one goes about understanding a place, I think that, and this ties into some of the things that a lot of the contributors have talked about, is that I think that it's been key to be flexible, and it's been fantastic also how the League has allowed us to be flexible. And because I feel that as I was doing work, I also felt that people were also telling me to talk to other people, and the people that in the beginning maybe I thought that were going to be part of the report, that list grew, and I was able to also gather people on different ways differently. So it's been, and also with COVID, I think that has made all of us shift many of the plans that we had when we applied for this project, and that has been really key. And I think that the question was about how one understands this. Can you reframe? Can you say that
Sure.
again?
I was just sorry, I guess I broke up there for a moment. I was thinking about when Renee was talking about the importance of sort of archaeology with the ship, in the way that I'm thinking with some of your interviews, in the way that you know, Tina is almost doing an archaeology of the Trinity site and the way that has affected the community. So I'm wondering if you might be able to share some thoughts on that sort of approach, and how that's helped you understand that region.
Yeah, it's been really also fascinating to be able to talk to all these survivors from them, or like generations of survivors from the Trinity site explosion in New Mexico, and getting to hear from them how their relationship to land, their relationship to place also changed after this event happened. I also think that one of the things that Carrie talked about all these monuments and places that one thinks about, and she also talked about how there's also a monument in the Trinity site place that resemble, or that talks about what happened, and she was also saying that what they needed back then was not such object. They needed people to understand what living there has been like, and what happened. So yeah, it's another thing that has been fascinating, and I know that we're short on time, but has been to see how people react when I was telling them that I'm an architect, and but I want to talk to them about environmental racism or water scarcity, and in the beginning how some of them were a little bit caught off guard, and they didn't really know how to articulate the conversation around these topics. But and it's been really good to have the opportunity to, as architects, to tap into these issues, and really even see that there's a clear connection between the built environment and many of the things that the article or the reports have been tapping into.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I could jump in really quick on that comment, I thought that was a really fascinating thing when we were talking with and interviewing people as well, was the curiosity that they had in why we were even interested in talking to a farmer, talking to social workers, and that conversation that preceded the conversation that ends up in the report was really fascinating as a way of kind of exposing the kind of flaws of our discipline that is such a hold up discipline and removed from much of the world for a lot of various reasons. And this provided a nice platform to be able to have those conversations and reach out and to kind of reframe what the role of the architect is in this context.
Maybe that's a perfect segue to turn to Brownsville. And I'm wondering if maybe you're able to share your thoughts on that point. In your report, you speak with so many members, kind of community activists and others who are agitating for change and representing various groups who have been sidelined in the past, and then in the ways that design can both specifically engage, but also sometimes just listen. And maybe you can share some thoughts around all of this.
Sure. So I think we started framing place, particularly Brownsville, around the perspective of people who are organizing. So we started off talking with an organizer who's been doing public advocacy around public infrastructure in general. And so really framing it from the lens of somebody who is day in and day out advocating for these, not only themselves, but with activating communities who are themselves advocating for these public changes. So that for us was really important and centering and starting off. And again, and kind of talking about what Nina spoke about, outside narratives, kind of framing a place in a region. The rally in Brownsville is very much among that. I mean, we're known for the border wall, right? We're known for SpaceX. We're known for a lot of things that don't necessarily are the actual lived experience of many, many people. And so we thought about centering those voices, right? The voices that are not necessarily mainstream and the voices that folks don't necessarily think about when they think about Brownsville or when they think about the region, but who are definitely doing the work, right? Who are definitely there in every single aspect of the topic areas. There are people that are already engaged, who have been engaged, you know, for a long, long time, and whose fruits are just starting to see, you know, or just starting to see the benefits of their labor in terms of the public space and public infrastructure equity. And so I'm going to go ahead and let another member of the group, but yeah, just centering that through a community organizer's perspective was really important to us. And then also finishing it with a community organizer's perspective, who is also more engaged in a reimagining of what the future could look like. But Lizzie or Jesse or Kelsey.
Yeah, that was great, Josue. One thing I'll add is you know, you're right, we were very intentional about who was being centered and how we were augmenting the common narrative historically and currently of Brownsville. And it's one of the things I learned through this was, even though you go into this trying to not have too many assumptions, we approach certain people with a reason, you know, thinking that they would talk about something or be able to speak about something. But what was really rewarding for me was, you know, we have relationships with some of these people. We think we understand them to an extent, but then when you talk to them about these topics where, you know, maybe you don't talk about that in everyday conversation, they bring this new perspective that kind of just hits you and adds a level of depth. And so that was real, you know, it's a reminder to not assume that you necessarily know what somebody's going to speak of. But it also reminds you that of this idea of resident experts, that there's this whole kind of layering of expertise that if somebody's given the opportunity, will present itself. And so that was a really rewarding part of this project for me.
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I think Josue and Jesse covered it all. I was just really also grateful and amazed by all of the work that the contributors did, especially given everything that was going on while we were working on this. And it was just a real pleasure to be able to work with some people that we admire a lot.
Maybe turning to Rob and Dan and your experience with South Beach and understanding that community. I think there was an interesting thought in the way that you frame your report of the way that we need to learn from a community in the way that is dealt with issues and learn to live with the land over time, and how that, along with the expertise of design, can help chart a certain future. So perhaps you could share some thoughts on that and this broader question of place.
Well, first of all, apologies because Dan and I didn't talk about at the beginning when we introduced ourselves, our connection to this place. Both of us don't have, we didn't originally come from South Beach. And by the way, South Beach is actually a series of small communities along the Washington State coast, very exposed to the Pacific Ocean. And because of that, most recently has gotten a lot of limelight on it because it's very susceptible to a possible large-scale earthquake and tsunami. And so it's gotten a lot of headlines about that, but also just sea level rise and climate change is something that they've been dealing with and has been a topic that we've been interested in. So I myself became very interested in that area of Washington State because of my interest in how communities deal with infrastructure and how that infrastructure might serve more purposes than just the thing that it's designed for, and how it could support a community. So I've been looking at those conditions in other areas of the world, and that's what started getting me intrigued by South Beach. And that's actually how Dan and I met. I had started doing research on the South Beach community before the American Roundtable initiative came up. Around then is when I met Dan, because I realized Dan had been doing work with the community for several years, dealing with that topic of tsunami and sea level rise. So just wanted to clarify that, and maybe I should let Dan maybe explain a little bit more his connection to that, because it's very central to our report. And also I'd love it if Dan could maybe say a few words, because he and I talked before this, just like all the other people did in preparation for this, but I thought he had some really nice thoughts about this question of understanding place. So I'm going to pass it to Dan.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, I think before we've been engaging with South Beach for just a couple of years, really, and so the how part, we're still in the middle of it. For me, I think how one understands the community. For us, we brought a team of all outsiders, not members of the community, to meet with those in the community that we've been working with, but the report itself is an effort to interpret what we saw and heard and put that out there. And we're still in the process of doing planning and doing design. And hopefully that this will help that conversation and dialogue to get us to continue to understand it a lot better. But the motivation for that, as Rob indicated, was really this amazing achievement that this community has already accomplished in building the North America's first vertical evacuation structure, a very specialized piece of architecture at the Acosta School to protect its youth and those of the future generations of the community from a tsunami, which is a very rare event, actually. I mean, the last time it happened at the scale that needs this kind of support, it was 1700, before there were any written records of what actually happened in this part of the world. But so similar to what has happened very recently and alarmingly frequently, actually, on the other parts of the Pacific Rim or the Indian Ocean, where media reports now have made very accessible to anybody, what the effects of such events are. And the community has been very galvanized by the science, actually. And I think what we wanted to understand was how it is that a community makes an investment of the kind it did in the school to protect its future generations and to think in this very progressive way, very future forward way, about or even around something that is quite rare and yet existentially threatening. So that we wanted to understand what it is that leads to a decision like that. I think what we found is, and we're still finding and wanting to ascertain is, the more connected a community is to its place, the more its history is still present in the way it lives and engages with the environment, the more likely it seems to be that it will be able to think forward and to take precautionary or transformative steps to get a future it wants. So it's been a very inspiring and very exciting place for us to get to understand, and we think it has lessons that could inspire and benefit lots of other places.
Thank you. And then kind of to finish up this kind of broad question around place to Killian and to Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley. I think many of the comments already made are reflected in your report and your approach. And you know, that this is a community with a lot of economic pain right now, and that it's going through its own sense of change. That also is, you know, from the ground up is trying to reinvent itself and create a new narrative for itself. So might you share your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I think that number one, you know, for example, with maybe beginning with the first question or the first set of kind of comments about how you get to know a community, and in a funny way, how I think that some of the things that you're talking about in Mahoning Valley is a community knowable. It is shifting, it is moving, it is kind of moving around. Even while you obviously have to respect the kind of things that have happened and the histories and other things that are so important. But this question there's a couple of things. For example, the recent elections have been very much felt in that area, right? I mean, this is an area that is a political football that everyone's trying to fight, and where investments and other kind of they come big. So all of a sudden, the new plans are coming up and billions of dollars spent. And some of these things begin to shift about the consciousness of what's happening on the ground. And so one of the things that I was interested is that there's some things that I was observing as we were working on this is that there were some major things happening even at the national level, like at a scale that is large. But how that often the reality of the community and everyday processes, the everyday living, the everyday things that are happening there, don't either see the effects of those much larger things, and are still working. So in our case, I think that, you know, we were able to chat, and because we've had some experience in that area with partners, with folks that we've been working with for years, that we had established a certain amount of comfort, and it was more about unraveling stories and things unraveling in front of us. For example, while we were writing our report, you know, big news items would come out about a site that is gigantic and is being laid fallow in the middle of Warren, Ohio, and hearing about the Ukrainian oligarch that owns it, and it doesn't really want to do anything with it, and then beginning to think about that even kind of those global stories are happening there too, and that is not often even dissimilar with some of the stories that you hear in New York City and other places about investment and speculations, and then that those are left, and the people that live on the ground are not benefiting. So I just wanted, so first of all, to me, one of the questions is knowability of a community, and how much the community, even themselves, the narratives that, as you're saying, what are they telling, what is being told for them often? And then how are the folks on the ground grabbing those stories and histories and remaking them actively? And then the question about inside and outside. I mean, I always like to say that I'm a little bit weary sometimes with this uber localist kind of arguments, because as an immigrant, I kind of don't belong anywhere. So, and I hope that there's room for outside views, for outsiders to come in and shift these relationships. And since we are here in the area, and it actually is a really kind of interesting question, because places like Akron, Ohio, and which are inviting refugees and other communities like that, are seeing some amount of economic growth, where sometimes the Mahoning Valley, which is, there is some of the language around not accepting outside, that there are some issues around that, and even potentially even part of the narrative that can open up, and that has traditionally been open. I mean, as most of the country, this place has been settled and has grown with immigration and migrations within the US. One of the things that I learned through making this process that I didn't know is, for example, how important the northern migration was to the steel and auto industry. I mean, what would become the auto industry, and how important the African American community moving north had been for them. All this to say that it's these sets of conversations are very important, and I wanted to address, because I saw a Q&A quickly, and I just want to say that, Lisha, that I saw the question. This is an interesting one, right? Like extraction and who ownership of your story, ownerships of stories. This is one that I think that we kind of often, I personally kind of often struggle as working in this in communities. So often, again, not always my own, mostly because, again, I'm not 100% sure what that would even mean. But the being conscious of that extraction, and I think that there's a little bit of attention. I think that even on the role of design, because often design tries to extract and then reconfigure, put back. And it's something that I've been kind of very conscious of and thinking about. I have to say that in the Mahoney Valley, with many of the folks that I've listened to, I actually, instead of weariness or fear of sharing, I get a little bit of a different story. People want to share. And that has been my experience for over 5 years, that folks here really, they want this, they're really excited about this, so working with us. They were excited, for example, the Build a Better Warren team, a group of community members organized by the local community design, community development corporation to clean up and do things. They're really excited to share their experiences working and using the kind of what some people would see as issues around vacancy in order to create new labor opportunities, to gain skills, to learn how to remodel their own homes, and to create community out of that. And they were very excited to share some of these ideas with us. And I think especially because sometimes the media here, like they park during the elections at the local coffee shop, NPR and all, and CNN and everyone. But that the stories of the folks that are doing this kind of work don't get out. So I found that a little bit of the opposite, but I think that is an incredibly important question to always be conscious about when our own practices become extractive.
Absolutely. I think that's, I mean, that is a real, for those who may not have seen, a person in the audience asked the sort of ethics of doing this work and whether, can you get around the idea of extracting the sort of knowledge and stories and using it for other means, and how do you kind of embody that kind of local, true local knowledge and local agency in a way. And I think that's a real core of this entire initiative that we have tried to address and to accomplish and to work around, but it's obviously always a tension that's really there. Annie, I see you kind of raise a hand. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think it's really something that we carried with us as we did the entire report. During one of our early interviews, and we talk about it in an intro, and now Nick has talked about it in his intro on the website, but one of our participants critiqued the way we described the project when we said that the roundtable looks at what American communities need to thrive, something. We, quoted the project brief, but we used the term looked at. And she said, we've been looked at enough. We don't need to be studied, and Zoe and I were both really taken aback in that moment. Not because it's just her candor was so on point, and every word we speak, the way we describe the work we're doing has meaning. And sometimes it's meaning that it's something you didn't intend. And so like, as we've written, we've also thought and rethought like 1,000 times, whether, how to use the words that like our or us or them, or, how to discuss a community that is not your own in a, sensitive and powerful way. And we kept coming back to like, how do we just let these voices speak for themselves? Like, we're not giving a platform for the voices. These voices just are what they are in their most purest form. And even in our introduction, like, how do we try not to draw too many conclusions here? Because who are we to draw the conclusions necessarily, except that we're the ones who talk to everybody. So we've heard all of this information. So we're trying to synthesize it. So I mean, I just think it's actually the place where we found mistrust was not community members. We had a similar experience to Killian, that the people from organizations and individuals had a fine time talking to us, but we did have one bait and switch where a director of a government organization was supposed to speak to us, and instead the assistant got on the call, and she just didn't. She was fine. She was wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but it was this moment we were like, maybe they don't want to talk to us, you know. So it's a great question, but it also it doesn't mean that the work shouldn't be done. It's that you really need to be conscious as you do the work over and over again, rethinking what your role is and how you can step back, really.
Does anyone else want to sort of add on to this question? Because I know all of you have thought about this deeply and have really tried to address this in your reports, both in the introductions, but also in terms of your methods and approaches.
Can I just add something about Africatown for a second? You know, we haven't talked about ritual and community generated events. And what I noted about Africatown was the community is very well organized, and they give, you know, major events several times throughout the year. And they literally take names of the politicians who don't show up to their events. You know, they have Spirit of the Ancestors events, and they note when the mayor doesn't come or when their city council person, you know, doesn't come. They have a ritual of the ringing of the bell that came off the slave ship. They note who doesn't come into that circle. You know, there's places of baptism, they pour libation. So there are a lot of rituals where they do head count to see who is authentically going to participate in events and rituals as one of the ways to memorialize their stories, which I find really pretty fascinating.
Carrie, I think you were about to say something earlier too.
Just briefly, I've done some development work too, and I found that kind of communication for development comes in handy when dealing with that kind of theory. Development theory comes in handy when approaching these kind of situations. That's all.
I also just wanted to quickly touch on something Killian mentioned about big corporations being very present in some of these communities. And when we had just started to look at this, and I think we only scratched the surface of just land ownership in West Virginia and what's public land and available as land that's owned by the people of the state. And we found that the majority land, the largest landowner in their state is an out-of-town timber company. So they own the most land in the state. They're not even there and present. And so when talking about ownership and who's telling a story and who's controlling the physical ground that we are trying to talk about, I think I would love to have a whole nother year to dive into that as a topic, but something that is very present in West Virginia and in places like West Virginia where folks from outside have come in, exploited, and then left, and then what's left over. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in our lunchtime presentation. Caroline Felice-Smith, who's a researcher at Harvard, she talks about infrastructure and how infrastructure was built historically in West Virginia and kind of left. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more, but I think it's a really interesting element that could warrant further discussion and research.
I think there's like a lot to learn from movement journalism and the idea of kind of seeing yourself as kind of like an editor to people's, you know, own personal thoughts and own, you know, own words, kind of just helping shape that so it can be more cohesive and it takes a lot more work, and it does sometimes. It's more privileged to people who can take the time and write their story, but I think that you allowed us to explore different ways to do that. So like, for example, we could have easily just given people some cameras and asked, hey, can you all go did pictures of what you consider within this? And I think a lot of us incorporated pictures and stuff like that, but there's different ways of incorporating people whose stories are being told differently in different and creative manners. And I think that you all allowed for that to be explored. And I know in the Appalachia story, I saw the little clips of the sound bites and I was like, that was a great idea. I love that. And so, you know, just thinking about how we can actually just have the people present their own stories too. I think movement journalism is a good way to think about.
And I would say, as a layperson, you know, you have a particular power from your guilds of design, architecture, planning, and I think Renee touched on this. And I don't know if it is being apologists or ambassadors. However, you're coming to a very old place that has been making something out of nothing for a very long time, then I think there's a powerful connection when we, you know, who are in the trenches connect with you who have a certain kind of access to tools and power and opportunities. And I think, although this may be obvious to everyone in this gathering, it's not obvious. I had to be educated to that. And so I'm deeply appreciative of it. But I was made aware of my own ignorance about your guild, as well as I had to discover what a public historian was and various other opportunities to connect to other guilds as well. So it's a compliment that to the MIT team, as well as to everyone in this community. And I think it's a greater opportunity for your guild to take that message further.
Dan, I think you wanted to add something to the conversation.
Thank you. Yes. Well, one of our partners from South Beach is in the audience tonight, so if I'm misspeaking, I hope he'll let me know. But I do feel that in our case, there is a range of responses in a way to this question, because the South Beach community is made up of both non-tribal incorporated municipality and unincorporated county communities, and a tribal, officially recognized tribe with its reservation. And Josue's point about treating it journalistically, in some cases, I think really worked out for us, because one of the Shoalwater Bay tribe's planners was willing to engage with us through an interview, which we incorporated into the report as a standalone piece almost, reflecting actually the tribe's particular proprietary arrangements for information and stories that it maintains. In the non-tribal areas, there's a more sort of a specialized professional diversity of channels of engagement. There's the this project was part of a suite of assistance in some ways, as well as research, academic research, to the need of the community to plan and design for resilience against coastal hazards. So in other ways, maybe not directly through this report, we were able to be of use and continue to be so, I hope. But then also another partner was the local historical society. So there's a natural home for some of the stories that were revealed through this report and our particular team's interpretation there, where people may find it interesting and a useful addition to the collection. So I'd say that diversity of partners was really enriched our ways of understanding how to ethically engage.
So as we are looking now at 8:30 here on the East Coast, I think we should draw this conversation to a close. As you've heard, there are just a massive array of fascinating topics and ideas and themes and issues all to explore. And we really envision this as just the very beginning of this entire project and process. So with that, I think we will call it an evening, but thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to all of the editors for all of the work they have done so far, and for having these conversations with all of us and sharing their thoughts and experiences. Thank you all and good evening.